Mornings always came early in Silver Ridge, before the first streaks of light had crept over the silvery mountains to the east. The town was filled with old sounds, horseshoes on stone, hinges creaking, and the wind whistling through the crevices of the dilapidated wooden houses. But that morning, it was not the crowing of roosters or the cawing of crows at the edge of the woods that woke Annalise Hartley, but an absolute silence, a strange, eerie silence. It was like the breath of a land waiting for something to happen. Annalise got out of bed, pulling her dead husband's frayed woolen robe around her. There was no banging of the door, as there was on windy mornings. There was no smell of wood smoke lingering from the nearby houses. Everything stood still. She pushed open the wooden door, and it creaked. On the porch, some remembrance fog lay over the ground like a white sheet of mourning. The chickens were silent. The wind had stopped singing. In her hand, she clutched the cold iron kettle and walked step by step toward the well behind the house. The old stone well that Daniel had built with his own hands years ago. Now it was just a silent shadow of the beautiful years. She approached the sonanon and wrapped her towel tightly, and prepared to lower the bucket of water when she heard a soft groan, a sound so fragile that she almost thought it was an illusion. But then it repeated, a whisper broken, choked, as if coming from the ground. She bent down, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes following the faint light through the mist. A hand, clinging to the edge of the stone inside the well, pale, trembling, and alive. Good God, Annalisa breathed, taking a step back and immediately turning and running back to the storage room. A few minutes later, she returned with a coil of old rope, an iron hook, and an oil lamp, her hands shaking. She tied the rope to the pulley that had once been used to draw water, her heart pounding like a drum. "Hold on," she shouted down. There was no response, only the rattle of the rope against the stone and a groan of pain. A moment later, the rope gave a slight tug. She began to pull. Every inch of the rope was a prayer. Every breath was a silent oath that she would not let anyone die under her roof. When the bloody, muddy body was pulled from the well, she nearly collapsed from exhaustion. The man was heavy, his whole body shaking. His clothes were torn, dried blood smeared on his shoulders, his collar still muddy. But it wasn't the blood that stopped her. It was the gold ring on his left finger, a circle carved with an 8-pointed star. Not a commoner, not a wandering criminal, a man of status. Annalise tightened her grip on the lantern, looked around the farm for any signs of surveillance, then leaned down, her arms around his shoulders. "I don't know who you are," she muttered, "but if God has brought you to me, I won't let you die here." Inside the cabin, she laid him on Daniel's old spare bed. Her calloused hands lit the stove, heated the kettle, prepared medicine from an old herbal bag. She was no doctor, but having nursed her husband through the dust and scrapes of the mines, she knew how to keep someone alive. When she tore off the outer layer of her shirt, she saw the wound on her left bicep, a deep cut, possibly from a knife or a splinter of wood. Her right thigh was bruised. There was a swelling near her ribs, possibly a slight fracture, and her body was cold as a corpse. She gritted her teeth, washed the wound with warm water mixed with alcohol, and sewed it up one stitch at a time, carefully and slowly. Each stitch was a question that ran through her mind. Who would want to kill someone like this? And why throw him into her well? 3 days passed. She did not leave the house. A Winchester rifle hung by the door in the kitchen, and on the table was her husband's dagger. The man remained unconscious. His eyes twitched as his fever rose. She changed the cold towels constantly, fed him water with a spoon, and made thin porridge with a few sprigs of vegetables from the garden. At night, she slept on a wooden chair by the fireplace, her eyes still glancing toward the bed. She did not know whether she was saving an innocent person or harboring the biggest trouble of her life. At dawn on the 4th day, she was awakened by a cough. The man stirred, his heavy eyelids opening. His eyes were cloudy and tired, as if he had been through hell. "Water," he whispered. She raised the cup to his lips. He took a sip, then tried to sit up, groaned, and fell back down. "Don't try. You're weak," he struggled to speak. "Where Noana Sorbitudman? Where am I?" "Hartley Farm, 4 miles west of Silver Ridge. I pulled you out of the well behind." His eyes twitched. There was a flicker of surprise. Then it faded. "Serpipuri, my name is Gideon. Gideon Hale." Annalise took a step back. That name, Somrum. She'd heard it. There was no way she didn't know it. Gideon Hale, the adopted son of Marshall Hale. the state's biggest mine owner, the town's hope until he disappeared. Rumor had it he'd been murdered. Some said he'd deserted. Some said he carried secrets enough to bring down an empire. She crossed her arms, standing by the door. I should turn you in. They're looking for you. Gideon closed his eyes. Unharm, I know. What are you after? To make it to be a mekisharnimanawanidan. He breathed, wincing in pain. Because I know Roe didn't just steal mines. He killed people. And I have proof. A spark flashed in Annalisa's eyes. Sterling Roe, the man who had taken over Silver Ridge after Marshall's shady death. The same man who had pushed her husband, Daniel, down an uninspected mine shaft just months before he died in an accidental accident. If Gideon was telling the truth, she stepped closer, looking him straight in the eye. You'll be here. No one will know. But if you bring trouble, I'll finish what the well didn't. Gideon smiled faintly. I trust you. That night, Annalisa lay on the couch, her gun in her hand, her eyes fixed on the man breathing shudderingly in Daniel's bed. Outside, the town was still dark with its own laws, where women were condemned for being kind, and men were killed for knowing too much. But inside the little cabin in the fog, a fire had been lit. Not the fire of passion, not the fire of fate, the fire of choice. Morning on the frontier often came like a thief, stealthy, silent, and unannounced. In the log cabin on the edge of Silver Ridge, the early morning light filtered through the worn curtains, illuminating the still pale face of Gideon Hale. Annalisa sat at the kitchen table, slowly pouring water into the iron kettle, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the man in the bed. She had not slept properly since the night she had pulled him from the well. There was still something inside her that she couldn't name. It wasn't trust, nor was it worry, just a hunch that her survival from now on would be tied to the name Gideon Hale. A soft noise made her look up. Gideon was trying to sit up, his pale cheeks twisted in pain. Don't try, she said quickly, getting out of the chair. Your shoulder isn't healed yet. Just seeing if I'm still alive. He breathed, forcing a smile. She held out the glass of water. He took it, his hand shaking, but he drank it all. When they set it down on the table, their eyes met. Annalise immediately looked away. You've been delirious for the past few days, calling out Roe's name, mentioning the notebook. Gideon nodded slightly. So I'm still alive, and haven't said anything stupid. Not yet. But I think you're about to. He smiled. A smile that had never been seen in this world for so long. Then his eyes turned serious. Have you ever heard of the Book of Underground Transactions? Annalisa froze. She had heard it a tale half true, half rumor. The book was supposed to record all the details of Sterling Roe's shady dealings. Bribing the mayor, bribing landlords, paying to kill people in the dark. But that was just men talking about it in the blacksmith shop. No one had ever seen it. And those who talked about it too much usually disappeared. I took it, Gideon said, looking straight at her. Before I ran away. Annalisa shivered. He said, a year ago, after the sudden death of Marshall Hale, his adoptive father, Roe had grown like a snake with an extra head. He took over all the shares of the mine, fired the honest supervisors, and replaced them with henchmen who took orders in the dark. Gideon was an adopted son and had inherited nothing of significance. But during a search of Marshall's old office, he discovered a secret safe hidden under the wooden floor. Inside was an old, gold-rimmed black leather ledger, signed by Roe, stamped with the mine's ore, and containing unreported expenses. There's Judge Reddick's name, Gideon whispered. And Daniel. Annalisa felt slapped. Daniel won Nebuchadnezzar, the last person to discover an illegal mine. I think Roe killed him to shut him up. The room grew cold. The fire in the stove crackled. Annalisa bit her lip. She had suspected. Daniel's accident had been so unexpected. No witnesses, no explanation. Just a brief statement. Collapsed ceiling due to mining in the wrong direction. But Daniel wasn't that careless. He'd shown her a drawing of the ore vein. They're digging the wrong way, he'd said. It's going to collapse one day, but it's not my fault. Do you have proof of that? She asked, her voice hoarse. Gideon took a deep breath. Yes, but it's not intact. When I was being chased, I hid it somewhere, nearby. Where Ferdinand Stubber working, he hesitated, then shook his head. You saved my life. I owe you. But if I tell Karina, you'll be in danger? Annalisa growled. I've been in danger. Sir Wad Shibrihana Sirwanta. Chiawi. Haley, since pulling you out of the well, since letting you stay here, if my husband's killer is still alive, I want to know. I want you to tell me everything." Gideon looked at her for a long time. Something in his eyes was broken. Not the pride of an heir, the weariness of someone who has lived in the dark too long. "Underneath the old stable," he said softly, "there is a secret compartment, covered with spare planks. I hid the books there, wrapped in oilcloth and beeswax." Annalise did not wait. She put on her cloak, took the lantern and the gun, and went outside. The morning wind whipped her face like a knife. The fog had not yet cleared. She crossed the yard, her boots on the hard ground. The old stable was hidden behind an old pine tree, abandoned since Daniel's death. Inside it was dark, and the smell of mold and old manure mingled. She lifted a board from the corner of the wall. Beneath the dust was a wooden compartment that fit snugly. Her hands shook as she pulled the cloth away and found a black leather book. The edges frayed, but still intact. She turned a page. April 17th. When on or 500 to D. C. Reimbursed for the side tunnel. My 21 non-assurance. 200 to R. Avoided investigation of mine 14. June 9th 5th. A00 to D. Fr. To clear Hartley from the way, her heart stopped. She walked back to the cabin, clutching the notebook as if she were about to crush it. "Who's D in fine, Fr?" she asked as she opened the door. Gideon looked at the notebook, his eyes lingering on that line. He swallowed. "Doyle Fairman was Suri Tifinen Suri Uanermon," a hired hand, formerly in the Confederate Army. After the Civil War, a freelance mercenary. They called him the Butcher of Shawnee. Annalise tightened her grip on the gun. "He killed Daniel." Gideon nodded. "Maybe. With that kind of money, it certainly wasn't to scare people." The afternoon passed heavily. Annalisa sat by the window, the notebook on the table like an unexploded bomb. Gideon lay in bed, trying to stay awake. "So what's your plan?" she asked. "Hide. Survive. Give the notebook to someone you can trust in the legal system." "Who else do you think?" he sneered. "I don't know. But if you don't hand it over, Roe will kill again. Buy again. Silver Rich will die. Not by gunfire, but by silence." Annalisa turned away. Her lips pressed together. "We'll have to do it together," she said, her voice calm. Gideon raised his eyebrows. "You don't have to get involved." "No," she said, her eyes never leaving the distant sunset beyond the glass. "I do, Uru, because the man I love died because of that book. And if you want to live to deliver it, you need me." And so, in the cramped kitchen, in the pale yellow light of the last day, an unlikely alliance was formed. Not out of love, not out of ideals, but because they had lost too much to turn back. Rumors spread faster than fire in the monsoon. 3 days after Annalisa found the black book in the stable, the name Gideon Hale began to be heard in the streets of Silver Ridge like salt on an old wound. "They say Hale's alive. He's out west somewhere. Someone says he's hiding in a widow's house. That's Annalisa Hartley. God, she's cursed." Annalise had known that from the moment she entered Fletcher's general store. No one said it aloud, but they all looked. The ranch hands avoided her eyes, turning away with their half-shrouded veils. Mr. Fletcher, old and toothless, fumbled with his salt and flour without asking any more questions. On the way home, she passed the tavern. A miner who had just finished his whiskey whistled. Perhaps all those years of widowhood have made Miss Hartley lonely. Now she's picking up men at home. A dry laugh rang out behind her. She didn't turn around. That night, Annalisa sat on the steps, watching the sunset streak across the mountains like thin blood. Gideon sat inside, rewriting a summary of the important entries in the black book. The wind carried the sound of crickets, the sighs of rotting wood, and somewhere, an unnameable sadness. "You know," she said, not turning around. "I'm used to the gossip. After Daniel died, they said I overworked him, that he only married me for the land." Gideon paused. "And you're still here. There's nowhere else to go." A long silence passed. Finally, he stood up and walked out onto the steps. "You can hate me for dragging you into this. No! I hate Sterling Row. I hate this town that thinks women have only 2 choices: submit or be buried alive." The next morning, Sheriff Myron Keller arrived. He was a fat man who sweated around his collar and chewed tobacco until his teeth were yellow. Annalise opened the door when he knocked with the butt of his gun. "Miss Hartley," he said with a smirk. There's a complaint that you're harboring a wanted criminal. Then there's a warrant. Sir, she said calmly. He chuckled. I don't need one when it comes to public order and morals. A single woman living with a man who isn't her biological father. Do you think people here will let that slide? Gideon stepped out, leaning against the doorframe. The light illuminated the bruises that had not yet faded on his face. I am Gideon Hale, he said clearly. I have not been convicted. And if you want to arrest me, I have a right to hear why. Keller narrowed his eyes, then spat a mouthful of beetle juice on the ground. I won't arrest you, yet, but believe me, Roe has eyes everywhere, and the townspeople don't take kindly to hidden lovers. We're not lovers, Annalisa interrupted, her voice firm. He's a guest. Then you'd better prepare a marriage certificate. Miss Hartley, otherwise, I'll have to invoke the Morality Act of 1862. The harboring of an unrelated person of the opposite sex, without a marriage certificate, is immoral and punishable by removal from town. He was gone. Gideon sat down in his chair, head bowed, hands on his forehead. Annalise poured him a glass of water, handed it to him without saying anything. Finally, he looked up, his voice low. It seems we don't have much choice. Do you think I've never had to struggle to live with the tongues of the world? She said. I was called a witch for growing herbs, a wicked woman for not marrying again. And he looked at her. I don't want to force you to do anything to your heart. She sneered. My heart has been broken for a long time. Gideon, but if a piece of paper can keep us both alive long enough to take Roe down, I sign. That afternoon, they went to the town church. Reverend Cole was the only one who did not refuse them. He was a gentle old minister, mute since childhood, but always spoke with his eyes. Gideon borrowed an old suit from a pawn shop. Annalise wore her old wedding dress, now faded to ivory and sewn with blue thread. No one was present except the Reverend, an orphan girl who was a witness, and Harriet Glade, the head of the town's women's group, who attended like a vulture to a butchered animal. The wedding was a hasty affair. No music, no flowers, no words, just their eyes locked on each other as they said their vows, and a handshake so tight that they both forgot the wind blowing through their hearts. As they walked out of the church, Annalisa felt light not because of love, but because the only thing keeping her from falling was walking. Gideon said softly as they reached the cabin, From now on, I am your husband, before the law, and I am your wife, before hell. They both laughed. For the first time, truly in the thin mist of the night, with the wind howling on the hillside. But the peace did not last. That evening, a brick smashed the kitchen window. On it was a crumpled piece of paper. You scum are not fit to live among decent people. Get out of this town, or someone will really die. Gideon picked it up, his hand shaking slightly. Annalisa quietly placed the pistol on the table and loaded it. The first time I heard the people of Silver Ridge call me trash was the week Daniel died, she said. She turned to her husband on paper. When you're married, she said, you have to fight like a married couple, at least. Gideon nodded, his voice quiet. Then we are The first morning after the wedding, no one spoke. Annalisa woke early. As usual, her hands quickly washing rice, lighting the stove, filtering water. She didn't look at the bed where Gideon lay now, her husband on paper, but in reality just a stranger who had once nearly died in the well behind the house. Gideon woke more slowly, quietly washing his face in the basin of water she'd left on the porch. He said nothing but a breathy thank you as she handed him the cup of tea. No one mentioned the night before the broken glass, the death threat, the decision to marry to survive. They didn't need to. It all hung in the cabin air, like dust from a stormy night that hadn't yet passed. Breakfast was silent. Sometimes their eyes met, but only for a second before they quickly looked away. Do you need me to fix the glass? He asked at last, as a way to soften the silence. Yes. If you're not in too much pain, he nodded. I'm in pain, but I'm not dead. That made her look up. Their eyes met longer. That tea, unsettling, she said, is what I thought about every day after Daniel died. They didn't say anything more until the afternoon. She went out into the garden to pick mint, collect herbs. He chopped wood, replaced the window panes. When they met in the kitchen, they stood for a long time on either side of the table, like old watchmen from two worlds meeting. I've never lived with a woman, Gideon said, and I've never lived with a man again, she replied, not looking up. He smiled faintly. So we're both new to this. It went on like that for a week. The rhythm of cabin life settled into a careful rhythm. Each kept his own space. Annalisa slept in bed, Gideon on the couch by the fireplace. Noche near. She cooked. He fixed. She cleaned. He He wrote. Sometimes they exchanged a few words. About food and um, about the weather, about plans to leave town if Ro was caught off guard. But most of the time, they were just present, sharing the same space. Switchhorn, sequinern. Two souls not sure whether to touch. On the 8th day, Gideon had a nightmare. Annalise was washing towels on the porch when she heard him screaming inside. She ran in, found him struggling, sweat dripping down his back, screaming, "No, it's the one, and not so. Don't push him. Marshall, Riston Furi Hinimanamani Shawiners. Don't." She shook him. "Gideon, when you wash him, wake up." He jumped up, his chest heaving. His eyes darted around frantically, then stopped at her. She was still holding his shoulders, her breathing quickening. They were only an arm's length apart. The heat from his dream still fanned against her sleeve. "You said Marshall's name," she said softly. "Your foster father." He nodded, wiping his sweat. "I saw him being pushed off the second-floor balcony. Rose said it was an accident. But I know he did it on purpose." Annalise let go of his shoulder. "I heard Marshall died of a heart attack." Gideon chuckled. "His heart is better than mine. But when someone like Roe has money and power behind him, who cares about the truth?" That night, they sat on the porch. The crescent moon rose behind the mountains, silvery light scattering on the cabin roof like powdered snow. "I thought I understood men," Annalisa said, her voice a sad song, "until I married Daniel. He was good, but stubborn. He came home late from the mines, hiding bruises. I asked him, and he said everything's fine. But no one is fine when they bow down to the likes of Roe." "Do you love him?" Gideon asked, not turning. "Love's the worst, Soren," she said, but not sanctifying it. There was a long silence. "I used to think love was what kept people together. Siberfuri," she continued. "But now I think maybe it's what made them leave if they weren't brave enough to stay." Gideon nodded, slightly. "Maybe that's why I came back to Silver Ridge. I don't love this place, but I need to face it." And 3 days later, an anonymous letter was shoved into the cabin door. The handwriting was hurried and smudged with ink. "We know you're alive. If the Black Book doesn't appear within 3 days, there will be no survivors in Miss Hartley's house next night." Annalise folded the paper and threw it into the stove. "They're getting closer." She said. Gideon was speechless. "I have to leave. If I stay, you'll be killed." She looked at him as if he'd been slapped. "Do you think I married you to be a shadow that follows you around? If they want blood, I'll be the first to pull the trigger." He was silent, as if moved by something unnamed. Then he said, "Then we have to leave before they get there." The plan was laid. Gideon would disguise himself, pretend to need medicine from town, and secretly deliver the Black Book to a single target, attorney Elias Benford, who had worked with Marshall Hale and was an old friend of Daniel's. Annalise would stay at the cabin, acting as bait if necessary. She would set traps around the yard, load them with bullets, and leave the back door locked with a trigger rope. The night before Gideon left, they sat by the stove, eating the red beans she had cooked. They ate slowly, silently, as if to preserve the last bit of peace. After dinner, as Annalisa folded towels, Gideon stood up. "You know," he said, "you're the only person who believed me and didn't ask for proof from the start." Nay, she curled her lips. "I don't need proof to know a man is shaking with pain and cold." He stepped closer, hesitant. "I don't know if I'll make it back alive." "Then you should live." "May man," she said, "because I did not marry you to be a widow twice." And for the first time, they embraced their return, not out of love, not out of duty, but because they were both too tired to continue alone. At dawn the next morning, Gideon left. Annalise walked him to the edge of the knoll behind the house, where the old, leafless oak pointed out toward the town like a warning sign. He wore a gray cloak and a low hat, and walked rather than rode so as not to attract attention. Before turning onto the main road, he turned back, his lips moving slightly. "I will return. Annalisa did not sleep that night. She sat by the window, the gun on the table, her eyes fixed on the night like a bird of prey. The wind whistled through the cracks in the roof. The rattle of the door made her heart beat faster. Around midnight, she heard the sound of horses in the distance. Her heart sank. One, then two, then three dark figures on horseback. No lights, silently entered the yard. She pulled the pin, cocked the gun, held her breath. A figure stepped to the door, bent down, and slid something through the crack. Annalisa held her breath. No knock, no threat, just deadly silence. When they left, she waited another hour, then dared to open the paper. Tomorrow night, if no book, you die first. Annalisa folded the paper, looked up at the night sky. If Gideon did not return in time, then she would fight alone. It was not quite dawn when Gideon stepped out onto the trail leading from the Hartley cabin. A shroud of fog hung like a shroud around every tree and every stone on the old road leading south to Silver Ridge. There was no horse. Henayami, Inena, Merdu. No call, just the soft sounds of the earth breathing as the cold night began to melt. Gideon walked Iwadan and Mashurin Wainshirdinana, clutching the cloth bag with the black book in it. It was wrapped in oilcloth and tucked deep into the lining of his coat. It felt like another heart against his chest, beating silently but menacingly. He knew if only he had a little slip, Roe would have an excuse to kill him. No charges, no court, no witnesses, just a shot, a quiet night, an unmarked grave. Versuri Handuwan. As Gideon approached Westmill Station, where the lawyer Elias Benford lived in seclusion in a wooden house behind the old barn, he felt his back wet with sweat despite the cold. He knocked 3 times, the signal Marshall and Benford had used. A trembling arm opened the door. Lawyer Benford appeared scraggly, with a bushy white beard, yellow eyes behind round glasses. He didn't ask what Gideon was doing there. He just pulled him in and locked it with 3 wooden bolts. "Do you have it?" he whispered. Gideon pulled out a cloth bag. Original, sir, signatures, seals, and illegal payments. Benford opened it, flipped through a few pages, and gasped like a man out of water. "God Almighty, with this, I can knock Roe off his throne. They won't let you off." Gideon said, "I need copies. 1 to the federal judge. 1, I'll keep." Benford nodded. "Okay, but not here." At that moment, a gunshot rang out. The back window shattered. Gideon and Benford fell to the floor, mouths full of wood dust. A shout rang out from the porch. "Hand it over." "Hey, Allah, well, you can't run." Benford was shaking. "They found us." Gideon crawled to the bookcase and pulled up the rug. Below was a small tunnel, leading down to the old mine shaft. "Down," he signaled. "I'll hold them off." Benford refused. "I'll stay. You take the book. I'm just an old man. They won't kill me. They want you." Gideon wanted to protest, but a bullet lodged in his leg left him no choice. He stuffed the book into his coat, ducked, and went underground. Annalisa Hartley in a cabin a few miles away, was reloading when the sound of hooves came from behind the hill. 2 or 3 horses, no lights, no calls. She yanked on the rope. 3 traps in the backyard were triggered. A tree branch sprang up, hitting one of the men, knocking him off his horse. She dashed into the house and bolted the door. Her heart was pounding like a drum. Shadows passed by the window. Footsteps pounded on the back deck. She stepped back to the kitchen table. Drawing the double-barreled gun, the back door was kicked open. The first man rushed in, a big man with a bandana and a hatchet in his hand. Annalise did not hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The explosion temporarily deafened her in one ear. He fell, blood spurting from his chest. Other footsteps ran around to the front door. She flipped the table, pushing it as a shield. A bullet tore through her shoulder, slicing her dress. She screamed, jumped behind the sofa, and fired back. The second man hit her in the stomach, backed away, screaming. The other retreated. The sound of horses' hooves, retreating from the courtyard in panic. She stood there, bleeding from her shoulder. Her gun still loaded, but the cabin was no longer a shelter. As the sky lightened, Gideon emerged from the tunnel across the woods. He jogged toward the cabin. His sides ached as if he had been hammered. A bullet had grazed his arm. Blood soaked his undershirt. As he approached the cabin, he saw that the back door was still open, and the smoke of gunpowder lingered. There were 2 bodies in the yard, one in black, the other with a gray scarf. Annalisa, He called hoarsely. No answer. He drew his gun and stepped into the cabin, stepping on glass. The wood and blood. Then he saw her sitting against the wall, eyes wide but unblinking. Annalisa. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees. She blinked, shaking. I don't think I could kill. He took her hand. You didn't kill. You survived. They bandaged each other. Her shoulder was slightly injured. His hand was torn. But the real pain was the loss. The cabin was no longer home. We can't stay here, she said, her voice low but firm. They'll come back. Next time, they'll bring a dozen of them. Gideon nodded. I have the original. Benford has a copy. I have to take it to the federal judge in Abilene. Then we'll go Mothram, she said. Tonight, they packed in silence, taking only the essentials. The notebook, the guns, the dry food, the two horses, Lyndon and Bess. Annalise removed the old white curtain, wrapping it around her shoulders like a shawl. Gideon slung his pack across his back, his gun across his chest. Before she mounted, she took one last look back at the cabin, the corner where Daniel had hung his coat hooks, the dining table where she had learned to embroider, the broken wooden chair with a wire leg she had not yet replaced. I hate this place, she whispered. And I love it. Gideon squeezed her hand. We will rebuild, somewhere else. When this is over, they rode under the thin moonlight. Each snap of a twig startled them. Each falling shadow made their hearts skip a beat. On the dusty road out of Silver Ridge, they were no longer fugitives. They were survivors, carrying justice in their pockets and hatred in their hearts. They left Hartley's land as darkness enveloped the pale hills. Each hoofbeat felt like a stab to Annalise's heart. Not from fear, but from memory. She had been born in that land. A bride, a widow. Now she had left it all behind, because of a vow to a man who had once been a stranger. As they crossed the dry salt flats of Bone Hollow, the wind picked up. The seahorse's eyes began to wobble on the hard, rocky ground. Gideon stopped, pointing to a trail leading up the mountains. The east path is ambushed. I see smoke near the century-old oak. They're waiting on the main path, Annalisa hissed. So where? Gideon turned, his eyes steely in the moonlight. Over Baker's spine. Steep. Rocky. No one's stupid enough to take it. But I remember the old path Marshall drew. She nodded. No words were needed. 3 hours later, they stopped at the edge of Greenwood, where the trees grew so thick that the moonlight was only dappled. Gideon made camp under a rock, pulling a hand map from his leather pouch. Here, he pointed, we'll rest. Tomorrow morning, go through Kestrel Creek, and if you don't slide, you'll reach the old trail behind Ridgewood Crossing. And if you slide, we're dead, but it's better than Roe catching you. They lit a small fire of dry pine, just enough to warm them, but not to give away their position. In the firelight, Annalise wiped the dried blood from her neck and shoulders. Gideon took off his coat, revealing a purple wound down his back. Neither asked why the other was so quiet, because they both knew this was not a night for comfort, but for survival. Suddenly, the sound of horses sounded from the north. Come nearer. Close in, very close. They both put out the fire and crawled behind the rock. Gideon drew his gun. Annalisa clutched the short blade. 3 figures rode past. Gideon whispered. Roe's men, Maror and Masha Sheraton. One stopped, his voice hoarse. I bet they'll take this path. Hartley knows the woods. Are you sure? The other asked. Gideon leaned forward, holding his breath. Sure, I saw his horse. There's a silver band on his foreleg. That's his Bess. Annalisa's heart stopped. The third man roared, split up. Go up the rock first. I'll go down the ravine. As they turned their horses, Gideon leaped forward and pulled the trigger. The first bullet hit the leader in the chest. He was thrown back, fell off his horse, gave a hoarse scream, and was dead. The other 2 drew their guns, but Annalise rushed from the right, driving her knife straight into one of his thighs and sending him tumbling off his horse. The man missed, the bullet whizzing past Gideon's ear. The last man ran, but Gideon aimed and hit him in the shoulder. The horse ran on, dragging him out of sight. The breathing was ragged. The woods were quiet again. They know we took the shortcut, Gideon said hoarsely. Someone must have been a tip-off. Annalise bent down to rummage through the fallen man's pockets. She pulled out a letter, a black seal with a falcon on it. She handed it to him. Gideon read, his eyes darkening. Kill the target before they reach the feds. Leave no testimony or documents. If they fail, eradicate the entire transit point. They're planning to kill Attorney Benford. He was speechless. It was almost dawn. They mounted their horses and rode through the woods without stopping. By the time the sun rose above the summit of Baker's Spine, they were clinging to the high ledge where a slip would mean death. The wind howled like a viper, and rock dust clung to their lips and eyes. By the time they reached the last trail, nearly 15 miles south of the federal checkpoint, Annalisa could barely stand. Gideon helped her off the horse, her back aching but not showing it. She looked up. Are we far? He nodded, his eyes sparkling as if no one had ever asked him that question in such a confident tone. Not much further. As dusk fell over the mountain road, they stopped by an abandoned guardhouse, a silver miner's stopover 10 years ago. The stone hut, moss-covered, was still more sturdy than a night out in the open. Annalisa stepped in first, her eyes scanning the scratches on the walls. Someone must have been imprisoned there, she whispered, setting her bag down in the corner. Gideon lit a small fire with a few dry twigs he'd picked up along the way. They didn't speak for a few minutes, just listening to the wind whistling through the broken wooden door. Finally, Annalisa spoke. What do you think makes someone return to a place that almost killed them? Gideon looked at the fire and said slowly, maybe to find the part of themselves they left there. She looked up, her eyes fixed on him. In the flickering light, her face was streaked with dust, but her eyes still as clear as the night he had first woken up by the well. Have you found it? She asked. Gideon did not answer immediately. He reached out, very slowly, and touched her hand on her knee. She did not pull away. I just no, he said, but this time, I am not alone. For the first time, they were not cold, though the wind still whistled through the roof. Annalisa woke in the middle of the night. The wind still whistled through the broken wooden roof like the sighs of those who had died in this abandoned guardhouse. The moon hung low over the distant mountains, casting a pale silver light on the rough stone walls, dyeing the room a cold ash. She turned to Wentindabim, Tim and one. Gideon was still there, lying on the makeshift blanket near the fireplace, his head resting on his backpack, one hand on his chest, the other hanging limply at his side as if he had abandoned everything else in the world. She didn't know what he was dreaming about, but his brows were furrowed as usual, and something about that expression made her heart clench every time she saw it. A man who was always prepared to be betrayed. She couldn't sleep again. Her hand went to the tattered canvas bag that held a small leather notebook, Daniel's diary. She carried it with her every time she left the house, not because it contained anything important, but because Daniel's handwriting was the last thing she had left to associate with a happy memory. She skimmed a few lines. March 12. I saw Annalisa smiling as she hung her clothes out on the porch. The light hit her hair like molten gold. She closed it, sighing. Daniel was a good man, but he had died believing in his coworkers, in the rules. Wafred had written, in what was called fair play in Silver Ridge. Gideon, he trusted no one, but that kept him alive. When Gideon opened his eyes, it was almost dawn. He caught her gaze, not panicked, not angry, not weak, just the quiet alertness of someone who had seen too much loss. You don't sleep? He asked hoarsely. A little sleep, she said. You grind your teeth when you dream. Gideon sat up, rubbing his face. I dream about blood. It's always like that. A memory, or a premonition, I don't know. Annalisa sat by the door. Do you want to tell me? There was a pause. Then he said, very slowly. Marshall Hale, my foster father, used to keep another book. Not an account book, a diary. He recorded Rose's death threats, secret meetings, and lists of people who had been bought, even the name of the current sheriff. You still have it? No. After he died, it disappeared. The police call it theft of evidence, when I call it wiping away evidence. Amo. Who do you think it was? Gideon looked at her, his eyes shining in the moonlight. The closest thing Marshall had to him at the end of his life, his personal secretary, Harlan Voss. The name Harlan Voss was familiar to Annalisa. He had been a mailman, then a town assistant, then suddenly had a big house, a vast land, and a vague title, Provisional Administrative Commissioner. He could be on the list, she muttered. Gideon nodded. I suspect he's the one who leaked the information from Benford. She looked straight at him. So, we were exposed the moment you walked into his house. Maybe, and if so, Gideon stood up, grabbing his duffel bag and black book. His voice was sharp. Benford is in trouble. They didn't have time to eat breakfast. They drank a few sips of spring water, threw dry bread into their pockets, and rode off as soon as the first rays of sunlight broke through the pines. The forest path was winding, roots sticking out like claws. Darkness still lingered under the canopy. No birds sang, no wind blew. Everything was unsettlingly quiet. An hour later, they were nearing Westmill Station, where Elias Benford had lived. The wooden house was burned to the ground. Smoke still smoldered. No walls, no doors, just a pile of ashes and a twisted iron bed frame lying amid the coals. Annalisa choked. Gideon jumped off his horse, ran into the ruins, and dug desperately. Where is he? He can't die that easily. Then he saw a mud track in the shape of a military boot, stretching from the back of the burned house out into the woods. Someone was dragged, he said. It wasn't an accident. They wanted to get rid of it. Annalisa grabbed his arm, held it tight. We can't save him if we die too. You need to back off. Be careful. For the first time in days, Gideon paused, not at her words but at her voice. It was like Marshall's voice when he taught him how to shoot at 13. Calm, sharp, uncompromising. He nodded. Let's go. Before they come back. As they pulled away from the station, they stopped at a large oak tree to rest. Gideon leaned back, pulling out his map. We have two choices, he said. One and one. Go north, through the high valley. Make your way to Fort Bell where the federal office is. 2. Dive south, to the house of a man who was Marshall's deputy. Can you trust him? He mused. He saved me from Rose thugs. But it's been 10 years. She looked at him. Gideon, I'm not asking about him. I'm asking, who else can you trust? He didn't answer. The moon rose again, and this time, it wasn't silver. It was a dirty yellow, murky behind a thick cloud. The wind wasn't cool either. It carried the scent of danger, the pungent smell that anyone who had killed for a living knew. Gideon and Annalisa sat side by side, their backs against the rock, not speaking, just breathing. They didn't know what lay ahead, but they knew one thing. There was no turning back. The sun rose slowly over the wasteland south of Silver Ridge, its rays illuminating the dew-soaked grasses as if refusing to give up the day. Gideon struggled to his feet in the saddle, his shoulder still bleeding through the rough ice. Annalisa walked beside him, one hand on the reins, the other holding a gun hidden under her cloak. They had left the old guard post at dawn, following the mountain road that led to Old Fen Creek, an abandoned ranch where a man named Asa Wilkes had once lived. Gideon knew the place too well. Asa had been second in command to Marshall Hale, his adoptive father, a man of few words, but a rock-steady hand. He had believed that if anyone had remained loyal after Hale's death, it would be Asa. But now, as the hills loomed in the dim light, Gideon was no longer so sure. Are you okay? Annalisa asked, her voice low. Gideon nodded, his face pale. He won't die. But I don't want to meet Asa without being able to draw a gun faster than he can. Annalisa curled her lips, her hands tightening on the reins. If he draws a gun, I'll shoot first. They arrived near noon. The farmhouse loomed silently in the valley. The roof was covered in moss. The stables were rotting. Grass grew waist-high. But smoke from the chimney. There were people, and maybe there was a past that hadn't been buried. Gideon dismounted, wincing in pain, and walked to the front door. The rotten wood creaked under his feet. He knocked. The door opened after a few seconds. Asa Wilkes. He was still as tall as ever, his beard grayer, his eyes fiercer. He stood there, rifle in hand, not hiding his suspicion. Gideon Hale, mine. His voice was hoarse and deep, as if he had not spoken the name in years. You live, Nikeni. Breathe, Gideon said. So do you? Isa glanced at Annalise and the girl. Companion one Surinen, Etitos Federan Shoon, not enemy. Asa hesitated, then nodded, stepping back. Come in. But keep your hands in sight. They sat in the old kitchen, where the stone was cracked and the smell of smoke mingled with the scent of pine resin. Asa poured 3 glasses of wine. So, he said, what are you here for? Not for old friendships. I suppose. Gideon pulled a black leather-bound notebook from his pocket. He set it on the table. You need to take this to Fort Bell to Judge Clayton. It contains a list of people involved in Roe's illegal land deals. Asa flipped through a few pages, then stopped at a name. Aaron Tim Harlan Voss. He took a deep breath. This guy has his own car and bodyguards now. He's as tenacious as a rock. Gideon frowned. You knew he was getting rich. I knew Ara where you would shekun. But knowing doesn't mean anything. I left the council when Marshall died. Things changed too fast. Asa looked at Annalisa. You're from town too, was Daniel Hartley's wife. She said, he was killed when he opposed Roe. I'm left with a plot of land and a lot of followers. Asa nodded. My condolences. There was a long, heavy silence. Gideon spoke, his voice steady. You're the last person I trust. The others are dead, or traitors. I need a place to stay, and new horses. We can't get to Fort Bell by the main road. Asa leaned back, his eyes darkening. Still trust me. Want to, Gideon said, but I'm not sure. Asa stood up and walked to the back of the house. As soon as the door closed, Annalise turned to Gideon and whispered, something's wrong. He's looking at you like he's calculating the price. Gideon nodded. I think so too. They didn't have time to run. The sound of a cocking gun rang out behind them. Gideon turned too late. Asa stood at the back door. The Winchester aimed. Drop the gun. He ordered. Both of you. Annalisa froze. Gideon scrambled to his feet, arms raised. Why? He asked. You owe my father at least one life. That's why. Asa growled. I let you live long enough to see the truth. Marshall is dead. Justice is dead. I don't want to be buried with him. Gideon gritted his teeth. When did you sell yourself to Roe? The day my son was lured into a dangerous construction site and died without anyone bothering to investigate. Roe told me, keep quiet and you'll be compensated. I kept quiet. And now, the rainwater. I'm alive. Asa shot. The explosion was deafening. Gideon collapsed, blood spattering the wooden planks. His shoulder was shot through. The second time in 3 days. Annalisa screamed. In a split second, she drew her gun, but Asa had her pointed at her. Don't be stupid. I don't want to kill women, but if I have to. She looked at him lying there, blood soaking his shirt. Remembering Daniel? Remembering the well. Remembering the day he fell. She didn't run. Annalisa raised her gun, fired. The explosion was short, sharp. The bullet hit Asa in the shoulder, sending him reeling back, his back hitting the table. She ran to Gideon and pulled him out, one hand on his shoulder, the other holding the gun pointed at the door. You can't die, she muttered. I can't bear to bury a decent man. They fled into the woods and crossing a shallow stream. Gideon fainted several times. She pulled him onto her horse and continued on, holding both horses' reins alone. That night, they took shelter under a rock shelter by the trail. The moon hung in the sky like a cold eye. Annalisa tended to his wound, tying his shirt with the sleeve of her robe. Gideon opened his eyes halfway and whispered, You saved me. No, she said, smiling slightly. You taught me how to do that. He chuckled. Then he fell asleep again. The next day, Annalisa redrawn the map of the journey. She knew that she was alone now, and a notebook that could change Silver Ridge. Gideon lay dozing under the low stone shelter by the trail. The blood on the bandage had dried to a dark brown. His breathing was slow and heavy, but not as rapid as yesterday. Annalisa sat beside him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the moon disappear behind the gray clouds. She did not sleep. In front of her, Marshall Hale's black notebook lay open, each line of old handwriting smeared with ink. At first she had read to kill time, then to find clues now. It seemed to whisper to her through the words. One underlined page. If I don't live to see the trial, find the place where I took Gideon when he was 14. The iron door, next to the stone carved with a running horse. The key is his mother's name in Spanish. She pulled from her pocket an old map Gideon had drawn. The Cerro Viejo mine that had been opened and closed after a mysterious collapse. She looked down at Gideon and whispered, You know where it is, but you don't have the strength to walk. The next morning, Annalise built a rough litter out of sticks and horse bridles and laid Gideon on it. She tied the saddle securely, leading both horses through the woods alone. A light rain had suddenly come, making the dirt slippery and the air thick with the smell of rotting leaves. But she didn't stop. Every step was a mental reminder. The horse carving, The iron door. His mother's name, as the sun rose overhead. She saw the mouth of the Cerro Viejo quarry. It wasn't a big hole like she'd expected, but a tunnel of rock blocked by a rusted metal door, almost buried in the landslide. Next to the door, on a black rock, was a galloping horse carved, as clear as new. She pursed her lips. That was it. The key, his mother's name in Spanish. She flipped the notebook back, searching the first pages. A small note on the inside cover, Maria de la Paz. She took a deep breath, put her hand on the iron door, and whispered, Maria de la Paz. The door hissed, it creaked open. An old alphabet lock. Marshall's own, rusted with age but still mechanically functional. She pushed open the door. Inside was a cold stone room, with just enough light to see the steel cabinets, wooden boxes, and a small table. The stale smell of rotten paper, leather, and ash clung to her chest like a whisper from the dead. In the center of the table was a carved wooden box, Marshall Hale's symbol, a six-pointed star within a crescent moon. She opened the lid. Inside was a thick file, including handwritten statements from farmers who had lost their land to Roe, photographs of executions disguised as workplace accidents, and a secondary map, marking the places where more evidence had been hidden. At the bottom of the box, there was a letter. Monsieur Surst, if anyone finds this place, I am either dead or defeated. But the truth never lies with one person. It lives when many hold it. Leave it to Gideon, or anyone who believes this town deserves another chance. Annalisa put everything in her leather bag and left the cave as the sky turned gray. The wind picked up, carrying dust from the mountains. She dragged the stretcher down the slope, back to where Gideon had been. He was still there, but his breathing was weak. She lifted his head, placed the leather bag beside him, and whispered, You said you trusted no one, but your foster father, he trusted you. And now, I do too. At night, on Frunen, she lit a small fire, warming herself with dry pine branches. In her hand was a spare map, marked with a place called El Corazon, the heart, near the Western Trail. She didn't know what it was, but she had a feeling it was the final key. She turned to Gideon and whispered, You have to live to get there. I'm not going alone. But that night, she wasn't the only one keeping watch. In the darkness, from the depths of the forest, two figures stepped out. One was in a brown cloak, holding a pistol. The other was small and had a hood over his face. They watched from a distance. No rush. No need debra. One of them said, She's found it. So it's time to tell Ro. Not you. It's time we got there first. As dawn broke over the western slopes, the wind carried the scent of burning wood, pine resin, and the iron of blood. Annalisa sat next to Gideon, who was still asleep, her hand clutching the leather case containing Marshall Hale's files, as if holding on to a final message. She opened the auxiliary map. El corazón sur más faranon, she whispered. The place marked like a glowing red X between two barren hills, Hart's Gulch. The Hart's Gully had been a makeshift medical station during the yellow fever epidemic 10 years ago. She stood. Gideon needed medicine. She needed time. And Ro wouldn't wait long. It was noon when they reached Hart's Gulch. The place was empty, except for an old warehouse with a broken tin roof and a rickety door. On the door, Corazon, scrawled in charcoal, Corazon, just as the map said. She lifted Gideon from the stretcher, laid him against the crumbling brick wall, and drew her gun. Stepping inside, there was nothing but dust and wind. But under the floorboards, a strange light filtered through the cracks. She bent down. Under the loose planks, a small cellar, underneath which was an old iron chest. Triple locked with a combination, Annalisa pulled out the black book, found the old code. The day Maria died, the day Gideon was saved from the hail of bullets. She remembered. It was the day Gideon had told her. June 3rd, 1848. She turned the code. Click it on. The chest opened. Inside, the original of all the testimony, notarized by 3 witnesses from the town. A photo of Marshall Hale, along with a suicide note, admitting he had made a mistake, but wanting the next generation to correct it. A silver badge. A symbol of faith that never rusts. Before she could pull it out, the sound of a cocked pistol sounded behind her. I knew you would find it, a hoarse voice said. She turned. It wasn't Ro. It was Asa Wilkes. He was swaddled, holding a gun, standing next to the two strangers, the ones who had been watching them. "He's alive," Annalisa said. "More than you can imagine. And now, you're on a one for Tornanon. I'm going to restore my honor by finishing what Marshall started." Annalise raised her gun. "I don't believe a word of it." Asa laughed. "You think you're the only one who's hurt. I lost my son to him. Now he's dead, and I'm still living in the dark." Gideon stumbled through the door now, not living in the shadows. He whispered, "But you choose to stay there." Asa turned, stunned. "Gideon, enough." Gideon held up his hand. "I didn't come to shoot. I came to finish." He threw the notebook onto the floor. "If you take it, kill us. You're only doing what Roe wanted." Asa's hand shook. "Marshall saved my life when I was a scared kid, and he was wrong to hide things. But he died because he believed someone could fix that mistake." Gideon looked straight at Asa. "If not me, then her." Tinidimum. Neither moved, until one of the men behind Asa shifted, his gun aimed at Annalise. Annalisa fired first. The bullet lodged in his shoulder, and the other missed. Gideon rolled to one side, gun drawn as he fell. Two quick shots. Only Asa stood there. Annalise didn't shoot. Gideon didn't either. Kimani went to under. Asa looked down at the gun, then dropped it. "I'm tired." 3 days later, Silver Ridge Town Hall reopened for the first time in 3 years. In front of hundreds of people, Marshall Hale's file was released. Roe was arrested in his own home, thanks to a telegram from Fort Bell based on the evidence in the safe. He didn't resist. Perhaps he knew. The storm had passed. Gideon sat on the steps, bandages wrapped around his shoulders. Annalise was beside him, holding the last letter Marshall had ever written. "Are we done?" she asked. Gideon looked out at the town. Children playing under the trees, people laughing, a new flag hanging from the bell tower. Just starting. The following month, they moved into Daniel's old house, rebuilt from the rubble. Gideon grew vegetables in the back garden. Annalise set up a small clinic where patients paid with vegetables, feathers, and sometimes a thank you note. One day, as the sun set behind the pines, Gideon handed her an envelope. "What is this?" she asked. "A request to the town to change the name of the main street." She opened it. Handwritten. "Request to change the name to Maria Street. Erkion." Annalise laughed. "For what?" Gideon looked up, his eyes softer than ever. "Because those who have died should live again, at least in memory."